I want to be honest with you about something before I tell you this part. I almost deleted the email without reading it. Her name meant nothing to me yet, just 3 letters in a subject line, Sarah. And I get enough strange messages from strangers commenting on this story that my first instinct, if I am being truthful, was to assume it was nothing. That instinct was wrong. It has been wrong more than once in this story, and I am starting to notice the pattern in myself. I opened it 2 days later. Not because I suddenly trusted it. Because I was bored on a Tuesday night and had run out of better things to avoid. She introduced herself in the first line. Sarah, Ethan's wife. I sat with that sentence longer than I expected to. Not shock exactly. I think I was past shock by then. More a kind of tired recalculation. The same feeling I'd had with Patricia's letter. With Margaret's Christmas story. Another person. Another piece of a picture I kept assuming was finished. She was careful in what she wrote. She said she was not angry with me, that she understood I had not sought this out, that she had actually found my name through a mutual acquaintance months earlier, and had simply watched, waited. She said she wanted to talk, if I was willing, and that she understood completely if I was not. I did not answer that night. I want to tell you why. Because it is not a flattering reason. Part of me did not want another woman's pain added to a week that already had more of it than I knew what to do with. That sounds selfish written down like that. I think it was. We spoke on the phone 3 days later. Sarah is a calm person. I noticed that immediately, the way you notice it in someone who has had a lot of practice staying calm about something that should not require practice. She told me she and Ethan had been married for 6 years. She told me she had suspected something for the last 8 months, though suspected was, in her words, generous. She said she had known on some level for longer than that, and had simply been unwilling to look directly at it. I asked her, carefully, how she found out about Caroline specifically. She said Ethan's phone had a habit of face down on the counter, which had never bothered her until, one evening, it did. She did not go looking that first night. She told me it took her 3 more weeks to actually pick it up, and that when she finally did, her hands were shaking so badly she almost couldn't unlock it. I want to pause here and tell you something about myself. Listening to her describe that, the weeks of noticing and not acting, the shaking hands, I felt something I was not proud of. Relief, not because of her pain, because it meant I was not the only person in this story who had waited too long to look at something plainly in front of them. Sarah told me she had, in her words, kept a file for months. Screenshots, dates, a pattern of unexplained late nights that did not match his work calendar. She was not building a legal case, she said. She was building proof for herself so that when she finally confronted him, she would not let him talk his way around something she already knew. I asked her what was actually in it, and she told me, slowly, almost reluctantly, like she was reading it off a list she had memorized without meaning to. A calendar entry for a site visit on a Tuesday that never existed on his company's actual schedule. She had checked, quietly, through a coworker's wife she trusted. A restaurant receipt for 2, found folded inside a jacket pocket, dated a night he told her he was working late, a gap of 40 minutes in his location history, every single Thursday, for 11 weeks, always near the same stretch of road. I want to tell you something about listening to that list. It didn't shock me. By that point in the story, very little did anymore. What it did instead was quietly confirm something I'd already started to suspect, without wanting to say it out loud, that Ethan was not a man who had made one mistake. He was a man with a system, refined enough that his own wife needed 11 weeks of Thursdays before the pattern became undeniable even to her. She had not shown him any of it yet. She told me that part almost apologetically, like she expected me to ask why not. I didn't ask. I understood, more than I wanted to admit, the particular kind of paralysis that comes from having proof and still not being ready for what happens the moment you use it. I asked her why she hadn't confronted him yet. There was a long pause on the line, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. I almost said her name to check. She told me she was scared, not of him, of what would happen after, of restarting a life at 34 with no income of her own, no family nearby, a mortgage with only his name on the deed. She said something I have not forgotten. She said, "Knowing isn't the hard part. Knowing is easy. It's what you do the next morning that's hard." I sat with that sentence for a while before I answered. I told her the truth, that I had filed within 10 days of finding out, and that it had cost me almost nothing financially, because I happened to have a structure already in place that protected me. I heard myself say that, and felt the imbalance of it immediately. My 10 days of courage had been backed by 18 years of accidental protection. Hers would not be. She would be starting, if she chose to start at all, from something much closer to zero. We kept talking, longer than either of us probably expected to that first call. She asked what Reyes had been like, whether I thought a lawyer would take her seriously with what she had. I told her honestly that 11 weeks of Thursdays and a restaurant receipt was more than a lot of people walk in with, and that Reyes, or someone like her, would likely tell her the same thing. I gave her Reyes's number before we hung up. I don't know, even now, if she ever called it. She asked me, directly, whether I thought she should leave him. I told her I couldn't answer that for her. I still believe that was the right answer. But I want to be honest that some part of me, the part that had already built a folder, filed papers, moved fast and clean, wanted to tell her to do the same thing I had done. I didn't say it. I don't think it would have been fair. My situation was not her situation. My 10 days were not her 8 months, and my deed was not her name-only mortgage. Near the end of that first call, she told me something about Ethan I had not expected, and it is the part of this conversation I have gone back to the most since. She said he had told her, years ago, before they were even married, about his own father. A long, quiet affair, she said, that ran for almost 2 years before his mother finally found out, not through confrontation, but through a phone bill, back before anyone thought to hide those things carefully. Ethan was 14. He told Sarah once, early in their relationship, that watching his mother go through that had changed him permanently, made him more careful, more honest, someone who understood exactly how much damage this kind of thing does, because he had lived inside the wreckage of it as a child. I don't offer that to excuse him. I want to be clear about that, as clear as I can be. But it is, I think, a true and uncomfortable thing about people that they can watch a wound happen to someone they love, understand it completely, even build an entire personal identity around never causing it themselves, and still walk directly into causing the exact same one. I don't fully understand that. I'm not sure Ethan understands it either. I'm not sure his father did. Sarah and I spoke twice more over the following month. The second call came about 3 weeks later, on a Sunday evening. She sounded different immediately. Not lighter exactly, but steadier. The way a person sounds once they've finally stopped circling a decision and started walking toward it. She told me she had spent that Sunday morning printing out everything in her file. All of it. The calendar screenshots, the receipt, a simple log she'd kept of the Thursday pattern, dates and approximate times. Nothing dramatic. Just facts laid out in her own handwriting in a spiral notebook she'd bought specifically for this. She told me she had confronted him that same afternoon, at their kitchen table, the notebook open between them the way I imagine my own folder had once sat between Caroline and me. I asked her, carefully, how he responded. She said his response was quieter than she expected. Not dramatic, not defensive, not at first. Mostly just tired, she said. The particular tiredness of someone who has been managing a careful lie for a long time and finally feels it slip out of his hands. He didn't deny the dates. He tried, briefly, to argue about what some of them meant. The receipt was a work dinner that got complicated. He said one of the Thursdays really was traffic, but when she read him the 11th Thursday, the one that fell on his own birthday, he stopped arguing altogether. I asked her what he actually said, if she remembered. She told me he said, "I don't know how to explain it in a way that doesn't sound like an excuse." She said that was the most honest sentence he'd spoken to her in over a year, and that it somehow made everything worse and slightly more bearable at the same time. On our third call, about 5 weeks after that, she told me she was staying. Not because she had forgiven him, because, in her words, she wasn't ready yet to know what leaving would actually cost her, and she didn't want to make that decision out of anger instead of clarity. She told me they had started seeing a counselor, separately for now, together eventually if it made sense. She told me she still had the notebook. She said she wasn't sure if she was keeping it as protection or as a reminder, and that she hadn't decided which one felt more honest. I told her I understood her decision, and I meant it. Even though it was not the ending I would have chosen for myself in her position. I did not tell her that. I don't think it was mine to say. I think about that conversation more than almost anything else from this whole story. Looking back, I think I expected her situation to resolve the way mine had, quickly, cleanly, with a folder and a filed document and an ending inside of 2 weeks. It didn't. Hers is still, as far as I know, unresolved. I don't know what she decided in the end, whether the counseling worked, whether the notebook is still in a drawer somewhere or long since thrown away. I never asked, and she never offered, and at some point our calls simply stopped, the way two people's paths do once the thing that connected them has finished doing whatever work it was going to do. That is not the kind of ending I usually give you in these stories. But I think it is the more honest one. Did Sarah make the right choice by staying, at least for now, while she figures out what leaving would truly cost her? And if you were in her position, with less protection than I had, and more to lose, What would you have actually done? Not what you think you should say you do.